Welcome to the Black Etc. podcast, a podcast about how ideas and culture spread amongst Black Americans, especially outside mass media. I'm your host, Ian Youssef. In speaking with my guests over these last few months, I've noticed a couple trends. One trend is that a lot of them tend to know each other independently. I'll be talking to a guest, and they'll mention someone, and coincidentally, it'll be someone who I've already interviewed for the podcast. A second trend is that a number of my guests have second careers. So they will have made a big splash in one field, and then they pursue a totally different field, usually relating to some aspect of Black culture, and they become an expert on that. Today's guest is one of those. I'm speaking with Lamont Jones, who's a big-time lawyer in the boxing community and the sports world in general. But he's also a card game enthusiast and amateur historian. He wrote a book about the history of bid whist and how it became popular amongst Black Americans. We had a great conversation about the origins of bid whist, how it spread through Pullman porters, regional and class distinctions, amongst other things. I learned a lot from Lamont because bid whist is kind of foreign to me. When we were younger, one of the card games we played was Tunk, but the partner game, we definitely played spades. We're a spades family, and that goes for my parents as well. Again, my folks are from Mississippi. There is one thing I wish I had asked Lamont about, and that is gender differences in the popularity of bid whist. The reason I brought it up is because recently I was watching a rerun of A Different World. It was season 3, episode 17. Episode was called That's the Trouble with You All. In that episode, Mr. Gaines and Walter were playing poker. And it was a battle of the sexes kind of thing where they were talking to Jaleesa about how women couldn't play poker. And then Jaleesa was going to find a woman to beat them because they were being chauvinist. But there's a line in that episode where Walter, Sinbad's character, says, "Women are good at bid whist, but poker is a man's game." So I wanted to ask Lamont particularly about that, about women being good at bid whist. Given his answers to some of the other questions, I have a sense of what he would have answered. Lamont is really knowledgeable and passionate about card games, as you can tell. He spoke about a lot of Black celebrities and luminaries, cultural and political icons who are known to play bid whist. And he had one anecdote about the late Jesse Jackson that I thought was particularly funny, so be on the lookout for that. I really had a fun time with this conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Today I am here with celebrated boxing business attorney, general counsel for Heyman Boxing Management, creator of Premier Boxing Champions platform. In the past, he served as an Olympic movement executive, executive director of USA Boxing, and general counsel of USA Track and Field. As you can see, he's extremely accomplished in the field of sport and law, but today I'm speaking to him in his capacity as a card game enthusiast and expert. His book, The Gist of Bid Whist, the culturally rich card game from Black America, was released last year. I'm excited to welcome Mr. Lamont Jones. Welcome, Mr. Jones. Thank you for joining me.
Ian, thank you so much for having me. Excited to talk about bid whist.
Mr. Jones.
Hey, Ian, I'm so sorry, bro. I'm Lamont.
What did I call you?
Mr. Jones.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Lamont.
Yeah.
All right. What inspired you to write this particular book on bid whist?
I tell you, I'd been a card game enthusiast for a long time, had fallen in love with bid whist. But as I traveled across the country, I saw how much passion the game inspired in people I'd encounter. So, for example, after I left law school, I moved to Los Angeles to practice law. And one of my law firm mates introduced me to his dad. And I asked the fella who was a judge, Judge Meggs, I said, Judge Meggs, have you ever heard of a card game called bid whist? And Judge Meggs jammed his finger into my chest. He says, I went to Nam because of bid whist, right? And he explained that he'd been exempt from the draft, but because he spent so much time in the student union playing cards, his grades dipped and he was therefore eligible for the draft and such. But all across the country, I'd find people who, had their bid whist stories about almost flunking out of school and that sort of thing. And it just became important to me to sort of document some of these stories and get at why the game has such a hold on so many people.
What exactly is bid whist?
It's a card game, right? It's a partnership card game. And I say a partnership card game because that's going to distinguish it, for example, from poker, where you're playing against all the other players at the table. That's going to distinguish it from blackjack, where you're playing against the dealer and such. It's like in spades and hearts when you have your partner and you're competing against another partnership. So bid whist is a card game first and foremost.
And you mentioned some of the other card games. How exactly does it differ from the other card games that are popular with Black folks?
I think it's important to highlight how they're similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go back to, the 1700s, the 1800s, the 1600s, the most popular game in the world was a game called whist, W-H-I-S-T, whist. And I didn't say the most popular card game in the world. I said the most popular game in the world.
Mm.
And whist is the tree from which all the other games that we play now derive, right? So whist is the tree, bid whist is a branch on the old whist tree, spades is a branch on the whist tree, hearts is a branch on the whist tree, bridge, etc. So all these games share certain fundamentals, certain principles, and so they're all related. They're all from the same family of games.
I see. I am really fascinated by your argument that these card games, like bid whist, are more challenging than chess. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think what the evidence shows is this. In chess, all the pieces are on the board, right? So all the information is presented to you. And what we've learned is that, the best computers, with the artificial intelligence and such, the computers can beat the best chess players at chess, right? It's a matter of sort of brute computational force, and the computers run the numbers and can beat the best players. Not so in card games like, for example, bridge. Because some of the information is hidden, right? You don't know what the opponents have. You don't know even what your partner has. And the artificial intelligence, the computers have not yet been able to deal with some of the uniquely human capabilities that help you excel in games like bridge and bid whist. So, for example, deceit, bluffing, outright lying. The computers can't deal with that. So because of the additional challenges that bid whist and bridge present compared to, say, chess, I maintain that these games are even more complex, even more challenging than chess.
Based on your research, what are some of the earliest references of Black folks playing bid whist?
Yeah, well, the earliest reference I've seen to a game called bid whist is in a 1908, 1909, the United States Playing Card Company sort of put out their book of card games and card game rules. So there's a reference there to a game called bid whist. It might not be quite the same game that we play today, but that reference is there. The earliest reference, though, that I've seen to actual people playing the game would be early 1920s. I came across the story of Harry Moore and Harriet Moore, the civil rights activists in Florida who founded an NAACP chapter there and who were, critical in registering voters in Florida. But they met at a bid whist party. They were married in 1925, so they met at a bid whist party sometime before 1925. That's the earliest reference I've seen to folks playing. I think the story of Harry Moore and Harriet Moore is a pivotal one in civil rights history, but it was heartening to me to know that they bonded at the bid whist table.
Mm-hmm. Was there a specific region of the country associated with bid whist once Black folks started playing?
So here's the thing. There are games that are sort of regional games, right? So you think of bourrée down in Louisiana. You think of euchre in the Midwestern part of the United States, sheep's head in Wisconsin. When I learned to play bid whist, it was taught to me by a brother from Florida, Terry Brown, and a brother from North Carolina and New Jersey, Randy Nixon, and a fellow from upstate New York, Sean Long. So I thought it was an East Coast game, right? I hadn't encountered it growing up in Oklahoma, although, there are bid whist players in Oklahoma. But what I've learned is that bid whist is, in fact, a national game. And it's a national game because of a singular force. And that singular force is the Pullman porters, right? So the porters, obviously we're talking, pre-social media, but in a lot of ways, the porters were the social media of their day, right? They're the ones who handed out valuable information to people about jobs and housing that helped fuel the Great Migration. And they were important cultural connectors, telling people about, which blues records were hot down south and which jazz artists were hot in the north. And because they were sort of respected cultural connectors, their game, Bid Whist, became popular. They spread it, from coast to coast on their train journeys. You'd have instances where, you might have 300 or 400 porters, say in New York or Kansas City, laying over, getting ready to disperse on their journeys the next day. And when they got together, they played Bid Whist, right?
Mhm.
So much so that it was called the porter's game. And because of the respect that the porters commanded throughout the country, because of the passion that they held for Bid Whist, the Pullman porters were important in helping Bid Whist become a national game throughout Black America.
Given that, I take it that amongst Black folks, Bid Whist had kind of an aspirational or kind of a high class veneer to it, given that Pullman porters were highly respected in the Black community? Or were the class dimensions not that clear? Did working class, lower class, middle class folks play as well?
My understanding is that it has been a game for everybody, but it does have that sort of aspirational quality, right? So,
Hmm.
for example, when I first learned to play in law school, we'd heard, scuttlebutt that Thurgood Marshall was a Bid Whist player, right?
Mm.
So, that to us justified all the time we spent playing cards. Hey, we're just trying to follow in the footsteps of the great Justice Marshall, right?
Right.
But the fact that people like Justice Marshall and Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan and Ella Baker and Althea Gibson and Jim Clyburn, the folks like that play the game, that gives it an aspirational quality, I think. It does for me. But I think it's important to note that it is a game that's embraced by people from all different sort of social backgrounds. So some of the best players I've encountered don't necessarily have fancy degrees and that sort of thing, but they'll wear you out at the Bid Whist table. So I think Bid Whist, it has been a game of the people, and I think it's important to point out that though it has this aspirational quality, it is a game for everyone.
What were some other ways that you found that Bid Whist was spread throughout the country? So aside from Pullman porters.
Yeah, I think the military is a big part of it, right? Because folks would go off to training camp and go off to serve, in their different stations and such, and maybe learn the game there and then take it back to their communities and that sort of thing. So I think people in the military have been a big part of helping popularize Bid Whist. Maybe not as big a force in that regard as the porters,
Mhm.
but certainly an important force in spreading the popularity of the game.
Yeah. I also read that there were some international aspects, like when Black service people went overseas, that they were playing there and bringing it to other countries as well.
That's not something I've come across in my research, but I am fascinated though by the connections between, or the potential connections between Bid Whist and France, right?
Hmm.
Because I look at the fact that there were some prominent Black people and a lot of Black people who spent time in France between World War One and World War Two. And you consider the fact that, now when you look at what's the biggest market in the world for cognac, right?
Hmm.
It's not Russia or China. It's not the United States. It's Black people in the United States, right?
Hmm.
And going back, well, now in Bid Whist, we use the term Boston. Boston is, you want to run a Boston on people. So I've done some research. Hey, where does this phrase Boston originate, right? And I mentioned earlier that the most popular game in the world in the 1700s, 1800s, et cetera, was a game called whist. It was the most popular game in the world everywhere except France,
Hmm.
right? And France had their own version of the game, but they didn't call it whist. They named it in a way to tweak their British rivals and remind their British rivals of their lost North American colonies, right? So they called their game Boston.
Hmm.
And in Boston, right, you could achieve a Boston by winning all the tricks and that sort of thing. So I do think that there are some sort of tantalizing connections between France and Black Americans and Bid Whist. So as I continue to research and try to find out exactly where the game came from, France is high on my list of potential suspects.
Great. Who are some of the other early Black pioneers in terms of spreading Bid Whist that you've come across?
I would have to say A. Philip Randolph would have to be
Mm.
one of the pioneers. I love the stories of the Porters and, ultimately how they had such a big impact on American society, civil rights, their immense civic contributions. But initially, it wasn't all rosy for them. The Porters were formed in 1925, but they weren't able to negotiate a deal with the Pullman company until 1937. And during that time, right, there were some dark days. I mean, the Depression happened during that time. And as the leader of this union, Randolph didn't necessarily have a lot of money. In fact, there's some reports that says, sometimes his clothes were a bit threadbare. And, to travel to different cities, he'd have to rely on the porters to get him on the train and that sort of thing. But one tool that he had at his disposal to keep his group together was bid whist. He'd sit down with them. He'd talk about their concerns. They talk about their strategic objectives, right? And they play bid whist. So bid whist was important, I think, during some pivotal moments for the Porters. Just as the Porters helped spread bid whist throughout the country, bid whist was important for the Porters as they, built their foundation that allowed them to make their immense civic contributions. I also think, I had an encounter once with the Reverend Jesse Jackson, actually a few times, about bid whist. And on the occasion in question, I approached him right before he was getting ready to give a speech. And I asked him, hey, I said, word on the street is that you're a pretty good bid whist player. And he kind of looked up from the notes he was writing, and he looked off into the distance and he said, I lost a game of bid whist once. He said, I was 6 and I lost because I was 6, right? So, the Reverend Jackson has my favorite bid whist story. But yeah, when you think about some of the luminaries who've played and enjoyed the game, I think it does add luster to this game.
So the infamous argument that led to Gilbert Arenas, former NBA star, pulling out a gun on his teammate was reportedly over a debt owed from playing bourré. Do you have any other stories like that? Maybe not as seedy,
Yeah.
but maybe these are apocryphal, but any other stories regarding bid whist that show how passionate people are about it?
Yeah, man. Thankfully, I don't have any stories to share involving bid whist and gunplay, right? But as I alluded to, man, the stories of people who almost failed out of college or had to go to Nam because they played, so much bid whist, that's part of the game's lore. But I do enjoy when I sort of encounter bid whist in the wild, as I like to put it, right? So not so long ago, I was reading a book, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. And throughout the book, the author, Honoré Fanone Jeffers, mentions bid whist, right? And she even gets at sort of the generational divide where the young people are playing spades and the older folks are playing bid whist. So I like encountering stuff like that. The movie, it's been a while now, but Queen Latifah and Common in the movie Just Right, there's a reference to bid whist.
Yeah, that's right.
And even in The Best Man, right? There's a scene where Terrence Howard's character's like, I'm about to run a Boston on you, brothers, right? You're about to get set. So, I think that was bid whist. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's fun to encounter bid whist in those sort of situations.
Yeah. Why do you think that these types of games, the trick-taking games like bid whist, are popular amongst Black folks?
Well, two things. I think first and foremost, right, it's all about the challenge and the puzzle of the hand, right? Because each hand in bid whist is a different challenge, a different puzzle. And, you want to figure it out and you want to partner with your teammate to figure it out before the other side does and, execute your plan, that sort of thing. So I think that sort of infinite series of challenges, I think that's like the ultimate appeal of card games. And then I think bid whist, I think it leaves space for some conversation, for some smack talk, for some laughter, that sort of thing. And I think that combination of like serious strategy, but also fun and smack talk and laughter and conversation, I think that's what helps bid whist players sort of build bonds and make memories at the card table.
In your day job, you're a lawyer in the boxing business. the fight game. Are there any lessons drawn from the boxing ring that you can apply to bid whist?
Uh, I like to say that bid whist has that knockout factor. And it has the knockout factor in two respects, right? First and foremost, I think the best bid whist players, they strategize, they compete like the best champion boxers, right? They understand these card game fundamentals, these card game principles, and they master them and they transcend them and they put their own style on it, their own, their own swag on it. So I'm thinking of, Floyd Mayweather with his pull counter and how, Roy Jones, he could have used a jab like everybody else, but he's like, nah, I'm gonna load up and hit you with this fast left hook instead. Right. And Ali and floating like a butterfly and that sort of thing. So they're able to be flexible and they can be aggressive. They can be conservative, whatever it takes. So that's one way in which bid whist has the knockout factor. And then the game structure itself provides a knockout factor. This is what I mean. If you're playing spades, right, let's say you get set early.
Mm-hmm.
You get set twice, you can forget it. But if you get set early, the other team gets a little bit more conservative as the game wears on. You still have to play out, hand after hand until somebody gets 500 points. But one team gets more conservative. The other team starts taking, making these risky gambits like blind six or going nil or whatever, right? But often the die is already cast. In bid whist, doesn't matter what the score is, doesn't matter which team is ahead, right? At any time, a player can make the right moves, get the right combination of cards, and win the game on that hand, just like a knockout in boxing, right?
Yeah.
So that knockout factor, I think, keeps the game interesting, makes every decision important, keeps everybody engaged. So that goes along with the smack talk and the laughter and that sort of thing. But that knockout factor in bid whist is, I think, what separates it from other games in the whist family.
Yeah. So now we get to the portion of the interview where I ask my guests the same questions. The first one: what songs got people on the dance floor when you were going out dancing at your peak?
Well, first, Ian, I might be at my peak now, bro. I mean, I'm in my mid 50s, but
all
hey,
good.
I could be at my peak now. But let me just say that it would be the same songs that it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
I like that sweet spot of R&B from like 1979 to 1985 or so.
Yeah.
That kind of R&B. And I am from Oklahoma, so Gap Band, outstanding. Oh, yeah. Girl, you knocked me out. So yeah, that's my stuff, Square Biz. That's when Mike gave us Off the Wall and Thriller and that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's my sweet spot right there.
Oh, good. What is a Black cultural work that's a classic? Any genre, any medium. It could be a book, movie, poem, TV show, whatever. That is a classic, but is underappreciated.
All right. Okay. May I offer two? Or are you going to limit me to one?
You could do however many you'd like.
All right. I'm going to go with two. One of my favorite recent books is On Juneteenth by Annette Gordon-Reed. And obviously, it's a classic and it's celebrated, won the Pulitzer Prize and that sort of thing. But, I think everyone would enjoy it. Just a rich history, a rich love letter to the state of Texas and to the history of Texas. And, as someone who grew up on the border of Texas, I just learned so much about it that I didn't know. And, I see some similarities again between bid whist and Juneteenth. In this respect, we grew up celebrating Juneteenth, but in recent years, right, it spread to the rest of the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some people kind of feel a certain kind of way about that. Like, other people are sort of co-opting our stuff. But upon deeper reflection, you realize, hey, Juneteenth is so important that of course everybody's going to want to celebrate it and share in it and that sort of thing, right? I feel the same way about bid whist. Bid whist was nurtured by Black Americans in the 20th century, right? This is a game that was originated by this culture of strivers and achievers. So it's certainly our game, so to speak. But as a card player, I think it's the greatest game in the world. So anybody who encounters bid whist is going to fall in love with it and, want to make it part of their game diet as well. So I see similarities. The other book that I would offer in this respect is called Half American: The Epic Story of African Americans Fighting World War II at Home and Abroad by Matthew F. Delmont. And I was just blown away, not just by the stories of heroism of, the black soldiers in World War II. More than 1 million black soldiers fought in World War II, but really the important and pivotal role of the black press in telling their stories and in like sort of framing arguments for democracy and freedom, and really sort of laying the intellectual groundwork for a lot of the debates and arguments that, we're still having now, and the fight for freedom that we're still pursuing. So Half American is a great book. Half American by Matthew F. Delmont, On Juneteenth by Annette Gordon Reed. Classic books to be sure, but I hope everybody gets a chance to enjoy and experience them and engage, with the wisdom and the information that they share.
Absolutely. What particular dish did your family make that you looked forward to the most, or still look forward to the most?
Man, we're in the holiday part of the year, so I'm already starting to think about that dressing.
Mm.
Not stuffing, not stuffing.
Not stuffing.
My wife and I have this discussion quite a bit. Her family used to be a stuffing family. I think I've begun to convert them, but I'm all about that dressing. It's got to start with the cornbread. It's got to have the savory seasonings.
Yeah.
And for me, man, it's always been like, it's not just a side dish. It's like the star of the show, man. I build my plate around the dressing. I will say that my wife, Stacy, her mom, Yvonne, they hit me to the sausage in the dressing.
That's right.
So, so I had to adapt there, but yeah. To me, dressing, cornbread dressing, star of the show.
One year, my wife and I made a blue corn, cornbread, and Dewey sausage, like Cajun-inspired one, and that was a hit.
What?
Yeah.
You made the dressing out of this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And it was great. One of my cousins joined us for Thanksgiving that year, and he still talks about it to this day.
Now, is it a regular part of the rotation, or was that a one-off?
It was a one-off because we usually do themed Thanksgiving, and that year was like Cajun. So we switched themes all the time, but that was a winner.
Gotcha. Now, is it unfair, Ian, if I ask you, like, what's one of your favorite? I know the blue cornbread and Douye sausage dressing is one. Is there another?
Oh boy. My mother, I really liked her pies. So sweet potato pie. Since then, I've asked her for the recipe. She obviously is really stingy with it. But I snuck one time and looked, and I saw she was putting sweetened condensed milk in it.
Yes.
And evaporated milk. I
Yes.
said, okay. So I know that's something there. I believe I know it's some cinnamon and nutmeg, of course. But yeah, my mother's sweet potato pie.
Man, you got my mouth watering with that one. Man, that sounds delicious.
Yeah. I want to thank you and credit you for something, right? So I told my mother-in-law last week that I was going to be speaking to you about Bid Whist. Her eyes lit up. And she was reminiscing about playing, all the games at the parties and folks playing Bid Whist. And she was like, folks are serious about Bid Whist,
I love it. I love it.
She went to my wife's sister's house and taught all of them how to play Bid Whist. So I credit you for creating a new tradition in her family.
Oh man, that is impressive that she did that. I love it. I love it. I hope to play with you and her someday. And I hope that she approves of the Gist of Bid Whist.
Yes. So thank you so much for joining me. Where can folks find you? Do you have anything else that you'd like to share?
No, I do hope people pick up their copy of the Gist of Bid Whist, the culturally rich card game from Black America, and check us out at gistofbidwhist.com. And I should also say that on Twitter, I am Lamont 6NoLow.
6NoLow.
6NoLow, absolutely. My favorite bid in Bid Whist.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Take care of you.
I would like to thank my guest again, Lamont Jones, for agreeing to do the podcast. He can be found at gistofbidwhist.com. The book again is called The Gist of Bid Whist, the culturally rich card game from Black America. Please check it out. To me, the lesson of this episode is the importance of cultural influencers. Lamont spoke mostly about the Pullman porters and the reach and the influence they had in the Black community. As I'm working to have my own influence and soul food in the community, I really take that to heart. The problem is I have, I think, a real bias against modern social media influencing, just the whole infrastructure, not the people necessarily. And I think I'm going to have to get over that. So Lamont's analogy that Pullman porters were the social media of their day, it really spoke to me in some way, in a way that didn't necessarily align with my current beliefs. As always, please like, subscribe, and review on whatever platform you use to listen. Check out the website, blackedcpod.com. You can also check out the Soul Food Etc. website, soulfoodetc.com. I added a couple sections there too, some links. I started posting a few things on the blog. Until next time.